Thomas Walker had been searching for months, combing through countless real estate listings, walking through homes that never felt quite right. And then, nestled on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, he found it, a stately, historic house that seemed to whisper promises of quiet evenings and a future he had long imagined, but never built. The deal had been quick, almost suspiciously so, but Tom had brushed the thought aside. For him, stepping onto the wide wraparound porch and feeling the mountain breeze was enough. This was the house he had dreamed of. He carried a bag of groceries into the spacious kitchen, setting them down on polished granite counters that gleamed under the soft afternoon light. The house smelled faintly of wood polish and old books, as though its former owners had left in a hurry but taken care to leave everything in order. Tom poured himself a glass of wine, savoring the sound as it filled the glass and toasted softly into the empty room. "To my new home," he murmured before taking his first sip. The clink of the glass against the counter echoed faintly, underscoring the silence that filled the place. It was the kind of silence Tom had always wanted, calm, unbroken his own. He had barely taken his first bite of the dinner he had laid out when he froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Footsteps. They were faint but unmistakable, coming from the second floor. At first, he thought it must be the wood settling or maybe the wind moving through the old structure. But then came another sound, the creak of floorboards, deliberate and slow. Tom put the fork down carefully, his heart thudding harder with each second. He was supposed to be alone. The realtor had assured him that the house was vacant, that the former owners had already moved overseas. Yet here was someone, or something, moving upstairs. Grabbing his phone instinctively, Tom moved toward the staircase, every step measured, his ears straining. The air grew heavier as he ascended, the sound of his own breathing too loud in the stillness. At the top, the hallway stretched dark and quiet, but one door was slightly ajar. Light seeped through the crack. Tom reached out, hesitated, then pushed it open. On the bed, half sitting against the pillows, was a woman. Her hair, dark and tangled, fell over her shoulders as she brushed it weakly with trembling fingers. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with shadows etched beneath her eyes. She looked fragile, as if the smallest movement might shatter her. She startled when she finally noticed him, her wide, feverish eyes locking on his. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked with panic as she clutched the blanket tighter around herself. "What are you doing in my house? This is my bedroom. My husband will be home any minute." Tom's breath caught. "Your house?" He took a step back, hands raised in confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is my home. I bought it. The deed is in my name." "The realtor! You're lying!" She cut him off, her voice trembling, half fury and half desperation. "Robert and I have lived here for years. He left for work, but he'll be back. You need to leave. Right now." Tom stood frozen, studying her. Every detail of her appearance, the gaunt frame, the hollowed cheeks, the way she winced as though every breath caused her pain, spoke of illness. He realized suddenly that she wasn't an intruder at all. She was sick. And yet, what was she still doing here? Why had no one told him? "I don't understand," Tom said quietly, his voice gentler now. "I signed the papers 2 weeks ago. Robert Mitchell, the man who sold me this house, he never mentioned you. He said he was moving abroad." Her head shook violently, disbelief breaking across her features. "That's not true. Robert is at work. He promised he'd take care of me." Her words tumbled over each other, her breathing turning shallow, frantic. She pressed a hand to her temple as though the pain in her head was suddenly unbearable. "You're wrong. You're lying. He wouldn't." But before she could finish, her body went limp. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed against the pillows unconscious. Tom's pulse spiked in terror. "Oh, God!" He rushed to her side, fumbling to check for a pulse in her thin wrist. It was there, weak, fluttering, but present. He cursed under his breath, pulling out his phone. "You're going to be okay. Just hang on." he whispered, though his own voice trembled. He dialed for emergency services, giving the address with clipped precision, each word heavier than the last. When the operator confirmed help was on the way, Tom dropped the phone onto the nightstand and sat heavily at the edge of the bed, torn between fear and outrage. How could this have happened? How could the man who sold him this house fail to mention his wife was still inside? Sick, abandoned, left to fend for herself. Tom glanced at the woman, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Her face, though strained with pain, still carried traces of beauty. And something else too, dignity even in her frailty. As the sound of distant sirens began to rise in the night air, Tom rubbed his forehead with his palm, overwhelmed. He had thought buying this house would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Instead, it had thrust him into a story he didn't yet understand, a story that already felt darker, heavier, and far more complicated than anything he could have imagined. And in that moment, staring at the unconscious woman who called herself Anna Mitchell, Tom realized one truth above all. This house carried secrets. Secrets left behind by a man who had vanished, and a woman who should have never been left here to die. Long before Thomas Walker ever stepped foot into that house in Asheville, Anna Mitchell had already lived through heartbreak that shaped her entire existence. She was only 18 when the first cracks in her world appeared, the day of what should have been a celebration. Her mother had decorated the small living room with balloons, a modest cake waiting on the table. Anna had thought it was going to be the perfect birthday, the kind where her mother would beam with pride and remind her how bright her future looked. But as the evening unfolded, the joy was cut short. Her mother, standing awkwardly with her hands clasped, cleared her throat and confessed she had met someone new, an older man from out of town, someone who promised her the kind of happiness she claimed she had never known. They were leaving together. That night, Anna had stared at her mother in disbelief, the candles flickering on the cake between them. "But what about me?" she had asked, her voice cracking with desperation. "You're grown now, Anna," her mother said, avoiding her daughter's tear-filled eyes. "You'll be fine. You have your studies. You'll build your own life." And with that, she was gone. Anna blew out the candles alone, the taste of sugar turning bitter in her mouth. From that moment, loneliness became a familiar companion. Yet she pushed forward. She excelled in her studies, earning a scholarship to a state university. The classrooms and the library became her refuge, the place where she could bury her pain in textbooks and assignments. She worked part-time jobs to cover what her scholarship didn't, living on coffee and determination. It was during these years that she met Robert Mitchell. Robert was older, successful, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who already had the world in his hands. He ran a small but growing logistics company, moving goods across the Southeast. Anna first noticed him when he gave a guest lecture in one of her business classes, his tailored suit and smooth words a sharp contrast to the scrappy college students in the audience. When he approached her afterward, asking thoughtful questions about her ambitions, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. Their courtship was fast, a whirlwind of dinners at restaurants she could never afford, drives in sleek cars, and bouquets of roses that made her dorm room smell like a florist shop. Robert had a way of making her believe she was special, that he had chosen her out of all the women he could have. And for a girl still nursing the wound of being left behind, that attention felt like salvation. By the time Anna graduated, Robert proposed. The wedding was elegant, funded largely by his earnings. Even her mother returned, this time with her new husband, smiling as if nothing had happened. She handed Anna a generous check as a wedding gift, insisting it was to help the couple start their life together. Anna accepted it with a stiff smile, trying to ignore the hollow ache in her chest. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that this new life would heal the old scars. At first, it seemed to. Robert was attentive, doting in ways that made Anna feel cherished. He spoke of building a family, of traveling together, of a bright future where she would never have to want for anything. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warmth began to cool. It started with small comments, suggestions that she didn't need to worry about finding work, that his income was more than enough for both of them. "Why struggle at some job when you could focus on our home?" he'd say with a smile. At first, Anna resisted. She had dreamed of a career of independence. But Robert's tone grew sharper with each discussion, and soon those suggestions turned into expectations. Within a year, she was no longer pursuing her ambitions, but keeping the house spotless and ensuring dinner was always ready when he came home. The walls of the house became her world, and while Robert thrived in his, she shrank in hers. Then came the illness. At first, it was headaches and fatigue that she chalked up to stress, but the episodes grew more frequent, more debilitating. After collapsing in the kitchen one morning, Robert insisted she see a doctor. The diagnosis was grim, requiring treatment that was both aggressive and extraordinarily expensive. Robert was there in the beginning, holding her hand through appointments, making promises that they would get through this together. He covered the bills, assured her that his company was doing well enough to manage the costs. For a while, Anna believed him. She believed in them. But as months turned into years, the burden of her illness became more than Robert was willing to bear. His visits to the hospital grew shorter, his patience thinner. Where once he had stroked her hair and whispered encouragement, now he sighed loudly at her weakness. "You're not even trying anymore," he snapped one night when she was too weak to finish preparing dinner. Anna's body was betraying her, and so was her husband. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a cage. The tension grew heavy, lingering in every corner, pressing down on her until she could scarcely breathe. What hurt most was not the pain of her illness, but the slow realization that the man she had trusted, the man who had once seemed like her rescuer, was drifting further and further away. The warmth had turned to coldness, the promises to silence. And though Anna still clung to the hope that Robert would return to the man she once loved, a shadow had already settled over their marriage, one that would soon reveal just how deep his betrayal ran. As Anna's illness dragged on, the strain in the Mitchell household deepened. Robert, once the attentive husband who sat through late-night hospital visits and spoke gently of recovery, had grown weary. The sound of her labored breathing, the endless medical bills, the absence of the vibrant woman he had first married, it all weighed on him. He began staying later at work, though Anna suspected that work had little to do with it. Whiskey became his constant companion. Each evening, he returned home with the sharp scent of alcohol clinging to his clothes, his words slurred, his patience non-existent. "You don't understand what this does to me," he snapped one night, his eyes bloodshot, when Anna asked why he smelled like a bar. "You think you're the only one suffering." The words pierced her, but she lacked the strength to fight back. Alone in her bedroom, Anna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the cold realization settling in. The man she had once trusted was slipping away, not just from her, but from the vows they had made together. And then came Crystal Hayes. She was hard to miss. Fiery red hair, sharp green eyes, and a confidence that could disarm anyone in the room. A realtor by trade, she had crossed paths with Robert during a business networking event in downtown Asheville. Where Anna's frailty reminded him of burdens and obligations, Crystal embodied energy, opportunity, and escape. She laughed easily, touched his arm as though they were already close, and whispered promises of a life unchained from sorrow. Robert didn't resist. Soon, what began as flirtation grew into an affair. They met in quiet corners of restaurants, checked into hotels under false names, and whispered plans about the future. Crystal knew exactly what Robert craved: freedom, indulgence, and validation, and she knew how to use it to her advantage. One evening, after a night tangled in sheets and whispered confessions, Crystal leaned against the hotel headboard, a glass of wine in her hand. "You're wasting away in that house," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Pouring money into treatments that won't change anything. She's not going to recover, Robert. You know that. Robert clenched his jaw, guilt flickering across his face. She's my wife, he muttered, though the conviction behind the words was thin. Crystal smiled, tilting her head. Your wife who's dragging you down. Think about what you could have if you stopped chaining yourself to her. That house, worth a fortune. Sell it. We could live anywhere we want. Europe, the coast, wherever you choose. And she wouldn't even know what happened. Robert stared at her, horrified by the suggestion, yet tempted all the same. He thought of the hospital invoices stacked on his desk, the endless drain of his bank account, the life that had become a prison. Crystal's words lingered like poison. Over the following weeks, Crystal pushed harder. She coached him on how to manipulate the situation, how to convince Anna to sign papers under the guise of medical consent forms. She trusts you, Crystal reminded him with a sly smile. Use that. Tell her it's for treatment authorization. She's too weak to question it. Robert hesitated, but desperation eclipsed morality. One afternoon, he placed the stack of papers in front of Anna, sitting beside her bed with a rehearsed expression of concern. This is just a formality, he said softly, pressing a pen into her frail hand. The doctors need these consents for your next phase of treatment. It's important, Anna. Her hands trembled as she signed, her vision blurred from medication and exhaustion. She didn't question him. How could she? He was her husband, her protector, or so she thought. With her signature, the deed to the house was his to sell. Crystal arranged everything swiftly. Within weeks, the paperwork was finalized. The historic house, the place where Anna had poured her heart into every corner, was sold to Thomas Walker. Robert pocketed the money, barely glancing back at the home he once shared with his wife. On the day the sale closed, Crystal kissed him triumphantly. See, she whispered against his lips. It wasn't so hard. She won't last long anyway. Forget her. Forget all of it. Robert forced a smile, though his conscience twisted. He drowned the unease in another drink, telling himself over and over that he deserved this. He deserved freedom, a new life, a chance to feel alive again. And so, with Anna still lying in the upstairs bedroom, clinging to the belief that her husband would return with hope and healing, Robert walked away. He handed the keys to Tom Walker and convinced himself that what he left behind was nothing more than a shadow of a life already gone. But deep inside, even as he boarded the plane with Crystal and their ill-gotten gains, a voice nodded him, a reminder that betrayal, no matter how neatly executed, always carried a price. The night after Anna had collapsed in her upstairs bedroom, Tom Walker couldn't shake the image of her pale face or the way her voice had cracked when she insisted the house was still hers. He had bought this property to start over, not to step into a mystery of betrayal and abandonment. Yet here he was, pacing the living room with his phone in hand, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. When the paramedics had left, stabilizing Anna but confirming she needed serious medical attention, Tom sat staring at the paperwork that bore Robert Mitchell's signature. He had bought this house legally. Every page was clean, notarized airtight. But no one had mentioned a sick wife left behind upstairs. Frustration boiling over, he scrolled through the sale documents again until he found Robert's contact information. His hand tightened on the phone as he pressed the call button. It rang only once before a voice answered, smooth and detached. Robert Mitchell, the man said. Tom didn't bother with pleasantries. What the hell is going on? I moved into the house I bought from you, and your wife is still here. She's sick, barely able to stand. Did you think you could just forget to mention her? For a moment, silence. Then Robert chuckled, low and bitter. Ah, so you've met Anna. Met her? She nearly died in front of me. She thinks you're at work, that you're coming back for her. What kind of man leaves his wife behind like that? Robert's voice hardened. Consider her part of the deal. She won't live long anyway. You've got a house, and soon you'll have it free and clear. Do whatever you want with her in the meantime." Tom's jaw clenched. "Are you hearing yourself? She's your wife." "No," Robert said flatly. "She's a burden. I carried it long enough. Now she's yours." The line went dead before Tom could respond. He lowered the phone slowly, his stomach twisting at the sheer cruelty in those words. Consider her part of the deal, as if Anna were nothing more than discarded furniture left behind in the sale. For minutes, Tom stood frozen, staring into the shadows of the room, wrestling with a surge of disbelief and anger. He had been duped, manipulated into buying a house tied to a woman abandoned to die. Yet when he thought of Anna, the frail way she had tried to assert ownership of the home, the hope in her voice when she spoke of Robert returning, Tom's fury softened into something heavier: pity, compassion. The next morning, determined to untangle the truth, Tom drove Anna to the hospital. She resisted at first, still insisting Robert would handle everything, but her body was too weak to fight him, and eventually she let herself be guided into the sterile halls of Mission Hospital in Asheville. The doctors ran tests, spoke in hushed voices, then delivered the verdict. Anna needed surgery as soon as possible. Without it, her condition would deteriorate rapidly. With it, there was hope, but the cost was staggering. 6 figures at minimum. Hundreds of thousands of dollars Anna didn't have. Tom asked the obvious question: what about her husband? Hasn't he covered her treatment before? The doctor's expression was grim. Her insurance was dropped months ago. No payments have been made. We reached out to Robert Mitchell repeatedly. He never responded. Anna's eyes filled with tears when she heard. "No, that's not possible. He promised he'd take care of it." She turned to Tom, clutching his hand with desperate strength. "He must be busy. He'll come back. He always said." Her voice broke. She couldn't finish. Tom swallowed hard, unsure what to say. The truth that Robert had written her off, that he had moved on with a mistress and a pocket full of cash from selling the very roof over her head, would crush her, and yet letting her cling to that hope felt crueler still. As he drove her back to the house later, Anna leaned against the car window, staring at the blur of trees and mountains beyond. She whispered Robert's name softly, as though repeating it would conjure him. Tom gripped the steering wheel, his chest tightening with frustration. He didn't know Anna anything. She was, in every legal sense, a stranger. The house was his. Her husband's betrayal was not his battle. And yet he couldn't escape the weight of it. He thought of her fragile body, the shallow breaths, the way she had collapsed in his arms. He thought of Robert's cold words. "She won't live long anyway." Back at the house, Tom helped her up the stairs, settling her into bed once more. He lingered in the doorway, torn between reason and conscience. He could walk away, keep his distance, and let her fate unfold. Or he could step into a fight that wasn't his, shouldering a burden he had never asked for. As Anna drifted into an uneasy sleep, Tom stood there, silent and unmoving, wrestling with the choice before him. Would he leave her to die in the shadows of betrayal? Or would he become the unlikely lifeline she had been denied? The question hung heavy in the room, unanswered but pressing, as the winter wind rattled against the windows of the house that now bound their lives together. For 2 nights, Tom lay awake in his new bedroom, the silence of the house broken only by Anna's faint coughs upstairs. Each time he heard her stir, he thought of Robert's words. Consider her part of the deal. The cruelty of it seared his conscience. He had tried to tell himself that none of this was his responsibility. He wasn't her husband. He hadn't made those vows. He was just a man who had bought a house. But each time he replayed the doctor's warning in his mind, that without surgery she wouldn't survive, he knew the truth. If he walked away, Anna would die. On the 3rd morning, Tom stood in the kitchen, staring at the folder of mortgage papers. His stomach twisted as he dialed his banker. "I need to refinance," he said, his voice low but steady. "Yes, immediately. I need the cash out." By the end of the week, the house he had only just bought was leveraged again. The money that was meant to secure his new future was instead being funneled into saving a stranger. When Tom arrived at Anna's bedside with the news, she looked at him in disbelief. "You can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's too much. Robert will come back. He promised." Tom shook his head gently, his eyes steady. "He isn't coming back, Anna. But you're not alone. Not anymore." She turned her face away, tears slipping silently down her cheek. The next day, Tom signed the hospital paperwork. He sat beside Anna as the nurses prepared her for surgery, squeezing her hand while fear clouded her eyes. "You'll get through this," he told her quietly. "You're stronger than you think." The hours crawled by as Tom paced the waiting room, his hands clenched into fists. Every time the door swung open, he searched the surgeon's face for an answer. Finally, Dr. Lee emerged, pulling off his gloves. "The procedure went well," he announced. Relief flooded Tom, so hard his knees nearly gave out. When Anna opened her eyes 2 days later, Tom was the first face she saw. She blinked at him, her lips dry and cracked. "Why?" she asked weakly. "Why would you do this for me?" He leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "Because you deserve a chance to live." In the weeks that followed, Anna's strength began to return, though slowly. Each morning, Tom arrived at the hospital with coffee for himself and tea for her. He learned how she liked her eggs, how she preferred the blinds half open to let in the light, how music, soft classical, calmed her nerves. It was in those quiet routines that something shifted. One morning, when he walked in balancing a tray of breakfast, she smiled. An actual smile, faint but real. It stopped him in his tracks. He hadn't realized how much he had wanted to see it until that moment. "You didn't have to," she said softly, nodding at the scrambled eggs. "I wanted to," Tom replied simply. Days bled into weeks. Anna laughed for the first time when he clumsily spilled water across the floor, muttering curses as he scrambled to clean it up. She teased him gently, and the sound of her laughter was like sunlight cutting through years of storm clouds. Yet beneath the fragile happiness lingered shadows. At night, when Tom sat by her bed, he sometimes caught her whispering Robert's name. She still clung to pieces of the life she had lost, as if admitting it was gone would undo the little strength she had gained. One evening, as the last light of day painted the Blue Ridge Mountains outside her window, Anna spoke with a trembling voice. "I don't understand how he could just leave. We built a life together. I trusted him." Tom didn't know what to say. He couldn't erase the betrayal or explain away Robert's cruelty. Instead, he reached for her hand. "Sometimes people show us who they really are when life gets hard," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean you don't deserve better." Anna squeezed his hand in return, her eyes glistening. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something, a flicker of trust, a fragile bond growing in the cracks of brokenness. By the time the doctors declared her well enough to leave the hospital, Anna no longer looked like the woman Tom had found collapsing in her upstairs bedroom. She was still thin, still recovering, but her cheeks carried color again, and her smile, rare though it was, hinted at resilience. As Tom wheeled her through the hospital doors and into the crisp Asheville air, she turned to him with quiet conviction. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Tom replied. "Just live." And in that moment, standing in the fading light of day, it was clear that their lives had intertwined in ways neither of them could have predicted. Tom had saved her body, but slowly, piece by piece, he was beginning to save her heart as well. When the doctors finally declared Anna strong enough to leave, Tom drove her home, not to the cold and empty house Robert had abandoned, but to the same place, now filled with something new. For the first time in months, Anna crossed the threshold without fear of being alone. Tom was there, steady and dependable, his quiet presence softening the silence of the rooms. Her recovery continued slowly, but Tom transformed the house into a sanctuary. The kitchen, once filled with the echo of Robert's complaints, now smelled of warm bread and roasted chicken. Each evening, Tom set the table, insisting she sit and rest while he prepared dinner. At first, Anna resisted, and used to such gentleness. But one night, as he placed a bowl of soup in front of her and sat across the table with a smile, she realized how long it had been since she had felt safe in her own home. Conversations blossomed over those meals. They talked about music, about childhood memories, about dreams they had never shared with anyone else. Tom confessed how he had always longed for a family but had never found the right person. Anna admitted how much she missed painting, how illness had stolen her inspiration. And in those long, unhurried talks, they began to stitch together the beginnings of something fragile but real. One evening, when autumn rain tapped against the windows, Tom turned on an old record player he had found in the attic. The soft hum of jazz filled the room. He extended his hand to her. "Dance with me." Anna laughed nervously, shaking her head. "I can't. I'll fall." "Then I'll catch you," he said simply. With hesitation, she let him guide her to her feet. His arm was steady around her waist, his steps patient. They moved slowly across the living room, her cheek brushing against his shoulder as the music wrapped around them. For a brief moment, Anna forgot her frailty, forgot the years of loneliness. She was just a woman, swaying in the arms of a man who saw her. Not her illness, not her past, but her. When the song ended, Tom didn't let go immediately. He looked down at her, his voice soft but unwavering. "Anna, I need to tell you something." Her heart thudded. "I didn't plan for this," he continued. "But somewhere between hospital visits and burnt toast and your smile when you finally laughed again, I fell in love with you." Anna's breath caught. A dozen emotions collided inside her. Gratitude, fear, longing, guilt. "Tom!" She stepped back slightly, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know if I can. My marriage, my vows, even after everything he did, part of me still feels chained to them." Tom's gaze didn't falter. "You don't owe him your life, Anna." He walked away, but he reached for her hand. "You're still here, and you deserve more than waiting for someone who isn't coming back." Her resistance crumbled beneath the truth in his words. She had been fighting against the possibility of love, afraid it would betray her loyalty, afraid it would mean letting go of the past. But as she looked into Tom's eyes, she realized something she had long denied. Robert had already severed those vows when he sold the very ground beneath her feet. The next morning, Anna called her lawyer. The divorce papers had already been signed by Robert as part of the property sale. All that remained was her signature. With trembling hands, she placed her name on the line, the ink sealing not just the end of a marriage, but the end of her captivity. When she set down the pen, she exhaled deeply, as though releasing years of pain. Tom was waiting for her in the kitchen, 2 mugs of coffee steaming on the counter. She handed him the signed papers, her voice unsteady but sure. "It's over." He smiled gently, pulling her into his arms. "Then it's the beginning." From that day forward, their lives intertwined more openly. They shared routines, laughter, and the quiet comfort of companionship. Tom's presence turned every mundane moment, watering plants, folding laundry, sipping tea, into something tender. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Anna's mother was returning to the States after years abroad with her new husband. Anna's stomach knotted at the thought. The memory of her mother leaving her behind on her 18th birthday still stung. Yet when the day came, she stood on the porch beside Tom as a car pulled into the driveway. Her mother stepped out, older now, her once bright hair streaked with gray. She hesitated, then rushed forward, tears filling her eyes. "Anna," she whispered, pulling her into an embrace. "I never thought I'd see you like this. You're alive. You're happy." Anna held her tightly, the old hurt still present but softened by time. "I am," she said simply, glancing at Tom, who stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. Her mother looked between them, understanding dawning in her expression. "He's good for you," she said softly. "I can see it." For the first time in years, Anna felt a fragile but real sense of peace. She had been abandoned, betrayed, nearly destroyed. But standing there with Tom's arm around her and her mother's blessing in her ears, she realized that from the ashes of everything she had lost, something new, something beautiful had begun. Robert Mitchell had once been the picture of success: sharp suits, a growing logistics business, a reputation as a man who could command any room he entered. But when he boarded a plane with Crystal Hayes, bound for Italy, it wasn't ambition that fueled him. It was escape. In Florence, they rented a lavish apartment with high ceilings and balconies that overlooked cobblestone streets. Robert marveled at the charm of a life that seemed so far removed from hospital corridors and medical bills. Crystal dragged him through boutiques, urging him to buy designer clothes, watches, jewelry. "You can afford it," she would purr, sliding her hand along his arm. "Why not enjoy yourself?" And for a while, Robert believed her. They dined in Michelin-starred restaurants, drank champagne that cost more than most people's rent, and attended parties filled with laughter and excess. He told himself he deserved this, that after years of carrying the weight of Anna's illness, he had earned freedom. But money, no matter how plentiful, disappears quickly when spent without thought. Within months, the funds from the house sale began to dwindle. Bills piled up and creditors called. Robert brushed them off at first, assuring himself more money would come. But it didn't. The business he had left behind in North Carolina faltered without his oversight. Contracts dissolved. Employees quit. Revenue dried up. Crystal noticed the shift long before Robert admitted it. She frowned when he hesitated over a bill, her green eyes narrowing. "You said you had money," she snapped one night, tossing her glass of wine onto the marble floor. "I didn't sign up for broke." Robert tried to placate her, promising that things would improve, that he just needed time to rebuild overseas. But Crystal had never been a woman who waited. Soon, there were whispered phone calls in the other room, messages she hid from him, evenings she didn't come home at all. The day she left, she didn't bother with excuses. Robert returned to their apartment to find her clothes gone, her perfume lingering faintly in the air. On the table was a note, written in her elegant scrawl. "I found someone who knows how to take care of me. Don't look for me." That someone, Robert soon learned, was an Italian businessman wealthy enough to provide Crystal with the life she craved. Alone in the apartment, Robert stared at the empty closets and felt the walls closing in. He tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He sent emails, begged for meetings, even stood outside the hotel where she now stayed. She walked past him without a glance, her arm hooked around another man's. It was then that reality crashed down. He wasn't the powerful businessman anymore. He wasn't the man with money, with status, with a beautiful wife waiting at home. He was nothing. His drinking worsened. Days blurred into nights as he sat in dim bars, nursing cheap whiskey and muttering to himself about how unfair life had been. Locals stopped talking to him, dismissing him as another washed-up foreigner who had squandered his fortune. In the quiet hours, when the alcohol wasn't enough to numb him, Robert's thoughts turned back to Anna. He remembered her soft voice, the way she had once looked at him with trust so pure it had shamed him. He remembered the vows he had made, the promises to protect her, to stand by her in sickness and in health. He remembered, too, the moment he had betrayed all of it, pressing a pen into her trembling hand and tricking her into signing away the roof over her head. The guilt clawed at him, relentless. He began to see her face everywhere, in the reflection of shop windows, in the shadows of his apartment, even in his dreams. She appeared pale, frail, her eyes full of hurt, asking him why he had abandoned her. Robert would wake, gasping, drenched in sweat, reaching for a bottle to silence the voices in his head. But no amount of liquor could erase the truth. He had traded a lifetime of love and loyalty for a fleeting fantasy, and in doing so, he had destroyed himself. Months slipped by. His savings vanished entirely. The apartment was gone, repossessed by the landlord. He drifted between cheap hostels and park benches, the suit that once marked him as a man of wealth, now frayed and dirty. People who had once shaken his hand with respect crossed the street to avoid him. At night, he would sit under the Italian sky, listening to the distant laughter of others, and wonder how it had come to this. He thought of Anna, perhaps still waiting for him, perhaps already gone. He thought of the life they had built, the life he had thrown away. And with each passing day, the realization grew heavier. Even if he returned, even if he begged, it was far too late. Robert Mitchell, once the man who had everything, was now nothing more than a ghost of his own making, haunted, hollow, and utterly alone. Winter settled heavily over Asheville, the Blue Ridge Mountains dusted with snow that shimmered beneath the pale glow of street lamps. Inside the Walker home, warmth radiated from the fireplace, and laughter carried through the rooms, sounds that had not been heard there for far too long. It was New Year's Eve. Tom had gone to great lengths to prepare the evening, not only for Anna, but also for the two guests arriving from far away, her mother and her mother's new husband. Anna had been anxious at first, unsure what it would mean to face her mother again after years of absence. But as the evening unfolded, she found the courage to let the past rest, at least for one night. When her mother stepped through the door, bundled in a wool coat, eyes glistening with emotion, Anna felt an unexpected wave of relief. The embrace between them was tentative at first, but as her mother whispered, "I'm so proud of you," the years of distance melted just enough to make room for something new. They gathered around the dinner table, where Tom had prepared a feast: roast chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables bought from the local market that morning. The house glowed with candlelight, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the air. For Anna, it was a scene she had once believed she would never experience again: family, warmth, belonging. Her mother's husband shared stories of their travels, while Tom poured glasses of wine and kept the conversation flowing with ease. Anna sat quietly at moments, soaking it all in, marveling at how drastically her life had changed. Not so long ago, she had been lying in a hospital bed, wondering if she had the strength to see another day. Now she was surrounded by love. Later, when the plates were cleared and music began to play softly in the background, Tom guided Anna toward the living room. He reached into his pocket, his hand trembling slightly. Anna caught her breath as he lowered himself onto one knee, his eyes locked on hers. "Anna," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I didn't expect any of this when I bought this house. I thought I was just starting a new chapter on my own. But then you came into my life and everything changed. You showed me resilience, grace, and a strength I can only admire. I love you more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" Anna's hand flew to her mouth, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the man who had carried her through her darkest moments, who had given her back not only her health, but her hope. She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, Tom." The room erupted in joy. Her mother clapped her hands together, overcome with emotion, while her husband raised his glass in a toast. Tom slid the ring onto Anna's finger, and as she gazed at it, her tears turned to laughter. For the first time in years, her future looked bright. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Robert Mitchell sat alone in a dingy room, a bottle half empty beside him. The echoes of laughter and love that filled Anna's new life were a distant memory to him, drowned by regret and bitterness. Crystal was gone, his fortune was gone, and all that remained were the ghosts of the choices he had made. He thought of Anna often, not with love, but with torment, knowing she had found happiness without him, knowing he had destroyed the only good thing he ever had. The contrast could not have been starker. Where Robert was consumed by solitude, Anna was embraced by family. Where he faced the cold emptiness of his betrayal, she stood on the threshold of a new beginning. As the clock neared midnight, Tom and Anna stepped outside onto the porch. The town below was alive with anticipation, people gathering in squares, children bundled in coats, neighbors greeting one another with cheer. The first bursts of fireworks lit the sky, colors exploding across the dark canvas above the mountains. Anna leaned into Tom, her head resting against his shoulder. The glow of the fireworks reflected in her eyes as she whispered, "I never thought I'd make it here. Not like this." Tom wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You're here because you fought for it, Anna, and because you deserve every bit of this happiness." For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the sky ignite with color. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined her. Robert's betrayal had nearly destroyed her, but it had also cleared the path for something greater, for love that was genuine, for a life built on trust and kindness. Inside, her mother watched them from the window, tears slipping down her cheeks. She turned to her husband and whispered. She finally found her place. And in that moment, as laughter drifted into the cold night air and the fireworks painted the heavens, Anna Mitchell knew the truth. Sometimes betrayal was the end of one life, but it was also the beginning of another, a better one. The final spark of light faded from the sky, and Anna closed her eyes, letting the warmth of Tom's embrace steady her. The house that had once been the scene of her despair now stood as a symbol of renewal. The journey had been painful, but it had led her here, home. Savannah in May has a scent I'll never forget. A blend of sweet magnolia blossoms, peach cobbler from corner bakeries, and old bricks that soaked up a century of sun. It was the last week of school before summer break, and the River Street flea market buzzed with its usual chaos: gospel music from a Bluetooth speaker, church ladies selling boiled peanuts, and tourists fanning themselves under wide-brimmed hats. I was 17, lugging a canvas backpack and trying not to sweat through my cotton uniform. Cassidy Ray, my best friend since third grade, tugged at my arm and pointed toward a booth nestled between a used book stall and someone hawking dream catchers. "There she is," she whispered. "Miss Moira Lou, the fortune teller." I rolled my eyes. "Cass, really? You believe in that stuff?" "She's not just anyone," Cassidy said, already dragging me forward. "She told Haley Thomas that her mama would remarry, and boom, 2 months later she's walking down the aisle with her old high school sweetheart." "That's called coincidence," I muttered, shifting my weight as the Georgia sun pinned us down like bugs under glass. But Cassidy wasn't listening. Miss Moira Lou sat in a foldable chair, wrapped in shawls the color of nightfall. Her skin was the deep brown of old leather, eyes dark and glassy like a doll's, framed beneath wiry silver curls that twisted under a wide-brimmed black hat. She wore bracelets that clinked when she moved, rings on every finger, some missing stones, some glowing with faded opal. Cassidy offered a crumpled $10 bill. "She wants a reading," she said, motioning to me. "I don't," I started, but Miss Moira Lou silenced me with a look. Her gaze landed on me like a weight, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. "You," she said, her voice low and cracked like dry bark. "Sit down, baby. You're the one I'm supposed to see." I hesitated, then sat across from her on a creaky stool. The air between us felt thicker than before, as if something unseen had settled on my shoulders. She reached across the table, palms up. "Left hand, child." Her fingers were warm, strong, and oddly electric. The moment she touched my palm, something sharp flickered behind her eyes. She studied my hand like it held a map only she could read. Her expression shifted, from amused to alert, from curious to afraid. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Your lifeline breaks and then picks up again. You'll be tested, girl, more than once. But you're strong." I swallowed, suddenly uncomfortable. "Tested how?" She leaned closer. "When the time comes, don't get in the crimson car. I don't care who calls you. If you do, it'll be a long way back." My skin prickled. "What kind of car?" "Crimson," she repeated. That deep bloody red. Not candy apple. Not cherry. Crimson like dried petals. Then she let go of my hand, and just like that, the air returned to normal. The weight lifted. Cassidy blinked. Okay, that was creepy. We walked away quickly, the $10 bill still resting on the corner of her table. You think she was serious? Cassidy asked, trying to sound amused. I mean, what does that even mean? Don't get in a red car. I don't know, I said quietly. But did you see her eyes when she said it? That night, I mentioned it to my parents over dinner. Mama, ever the English teacher, laughed softly and quoted some poem about fate and choice. Daddy, a retired army engineer, just nodded. Stay away from strangers offering you rides, he said, dunking his cornbread into a bowl of collard greens. No mystic necessary. They weren't worried, so I tried not to be either. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan whirling above me, her words echoed in my head again. Don't get in the crimson car. 2 years passed. I was no longer the girl who believed in palm readings or held her breath when someone said the word destiny. College had a way of sanding the edges off your wonder. I was now a freshman at a small university just outside Savannah, living in a dorm with beige walls and plastic blinds that never quite closed all the way. I studied education, planning to teach literature like Mama, hoping I might one day walk into a classroom and change some kid's life the way a few teachers had changed mine. Cassidy and I ended up in the same program. By pure coincidence or fate, I no longer knew the difference. She'd wanted to study graphic design, but her parents talked her into something more reliable. So we were together again, like high school never ended. Same laugh, same wild ideas, same reckless energy that I admired and feared in equal measure. One Friday afternoon in June, Cassidy burst into our dorm room like a summer storm, cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling. She tossed her backpack onto the floor and waved 2 gold-trimmed invitations like victory flags. You will never guess, she announced out of breath, what just fell into our laps. I raised an eyebrow, still cross-legged on my twin bed, highlighter in hand. Unless it's a miracle that lets me skip next week's psych exam, I'm not interested. Better, she said, flopping down beside me. It's the summer kickoff party at Eden Club with Elijah Devereaux. My stomach flipped. That name sounds expensive. It is, she grinned. His dad owns half the riverfront. Malls, hotels, condos with infinity pools. Elijah's like Savannah's Gatsby. I blinked. And we're invited to this why? Because I'm dating his best friend. You remember Wesley, guy from the computer lab with the floppy hair and lattes that smell like ambition? He and Elijah are tight, and he got us in. And no, she added before I could ask, this is not some weird double date thing. There'll be a whole crowd. Music, cocktails, lights by the pool. Just say yes, Rachel. I hesitated. Something in my chest tightened, old and distant. What? She asked, watching me carefully. Noting, elite. I promised Mama I'd visit home this weekend. Cassidy rolled her eyes. You live 30 minutes away. Visit Sunday. Come on, girl, you need this. Finals fried your soul. You haven't worn mascara in a month. That made me laugh. That's because I cry when I apply it. Exactly, she said, squeezing my arm. Tonight we sparkle. I called Mama an hour later, told her Cassidy had roped me into something, and I'd be back Sunday afternoon. Her silence on the other end wasn't angry, just heavy. Where is this party? She finally asked. Some club out by the river, I said, avoiding the name on the invitation. Cassidy says it's legit. She'll be with me the whole time. I don't like it, Mama said quietly. Strange people, alcohol, young men with too much money. It's a recipe. I'm not drinking, I assured her. And I'll text you when we get there and again when we leave. Midnight, she said. You'll be home before midnight. Yes, ma'am. But even after I hung up, Her voice lingered in my ear, and underneath it, like an echo, "Don't get in the crimson car." I didn't tell her about the prophecy. I hadn't spoken of it in 2 years, not even to Cassidy. It had faded into the dusty corner of memory where childhood fears live. But that night it stirred again, quiet and watchful, waiting. The Eden Club sat beyond the city limits, nestled along the bend of the Savannah River, hidden behind gates wrapped in flowering vines and the illusion of exclusivity. Cassidy insisted we take a rideshare instead of my rusted Corolla. "You can't roll up to a place like Eden in a car that sounds like it smokes cigarettes," she joked. The sun was just dipping when we pulled up. The building looked like something from an old movie. White columns, chandeliers hanging on the porch, music pulsing through the tall windows like the place had a heartbeat of its own. People were already milling around with glasses of champagne, all of them dressed in linen and effortless confidence. I tugged at my second-hand cocktail dress, deep green, a bit snug at the waist. I had worn it for my high school graduation. It felt out of place here. Cassidy, meanwhile, was glowing. Her red dress hugged every curve, and her curls bounced with every step as she waved to Wesley across the lawn. He jogged over, kissed her on the cheek, and turned to me with a polite smile. "You must be Rachel," he said. "Cassidy's told me you're the sensible one." "I try," I replied, forcing a grin. "Come on," he said, "Elijah's inside. He'll be glad you came." And just like that, we were swept inside the golden blur of music, laughter, and chandeliers the size of small cars. Someone handed me a glass of something pink and fizzy. I declined, asking for juice instead. I noticed the look, half amused, half surprised, but no one pressed. Cassidy disappeared into the crowd with Wesley, and I found myself by the terrace, nursing a glass of orange juice and wondering if Mama was still awake. That's when he appeared. Elijah Devereaux. He wasn't what I expected. No smug smirk. No cufflinks that screamed inheritance. Just a white shirt rolled up at the sleeves, dark hair a little messy, and a smile that walked the line between charm and mischief. "You must be Rachel," he said, handing me a fresh drink. "I've been hearing about you all night." "Hopefully good things," I said. He nodded. "Cassidy says you keep her from spontaneously combusting. That's noble." I laughed despite myself. We talked about college, books, how Savannah smelled better after rain. He had opinions about Flannery O'Connor and could name every Civil War general buried downtown. He was smarter than he looked. Or maybe I just wanted him to be. Time passed too quickly. At one point, I glanced at my phone. 11:47 p.m. "I should go," I said, standing abruptly. "I promised my mom." "I'll drive you," Elijah offered. Cassidy reappeared behind him, her lipstick slightly smudged. "That's perfect," she said. "Wesley's staying, and I didn't bring my phone charger." I hesitated. "Maybe we should get a ride." "Don't be silly," Elijah cut in. "I haven't had that much to drink. Besides, I want to show you something." "What?" He smiled like it was a secret. "My new baby. A gift from my dad for finishing the semester with straight A's. Come on, she's in the back lot." I followed them reluctantly, the gravel crunching under my flats. The lot behind the club was darker, quieter. Fireflies floated above the ground like spirits. Elijah pressed a button on his key fob. Headlights flashed. The car was beautiful. A deep red BMW. New, sleek, gleaming under the security light. But the color wasn't candy red or glossy sports car red. It was something else, richer, darker. Crimson. My blood turned to ice. It was the kind of color you only saw on antique velvet or dried rose petals. My legs refused to move, but Cassidy was already sliding into the back seat, waving at me to hurry. I blinked. My ears buzzed. Somewhere inside me, a girl I used to be was screaming, "Don't get in the crimson car. Rachel." Elijah called. "You okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little tired." "You can rest on the way," he said, opening the passenger door with a flourish. I got in. I don't know why. Maybe because Cassidy had. Maybe because it was just easier than arguing. Maybe because I didn't want to seem crazy. But as the door clicked shut beside me and the engine purred to life, something inside me splintered. Grant Holloway, one of Elijah's quieter friends, climbed into the back seat beside Cassidy. "Mind if I tag along?" he asked. Elijah laughed. "Sure, man. The more the merrier." We pulled out of the parking lot, the trees swallowing us whole as we merged onto the empty highway. That's when I remembered the rest of the prophecy. If you do, it'll be a long way back. And still, I said nothing. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of ink, swallowed by pine trees on either side. The windows were down, and the scent of river water and summer dust filled the car. Somewhere in the back seat, Cassidy was humming along to the music drifting from the radio. I kept my eyes on the shadows outside, trying not to look at the speedometer or Elijah's hands on the wheel. He was driving fast. Too fast. "Elijah," I started. "We're fine," he said, laughing like I'd just asked him to slow down on a roller coaster. "There's no one else out here. The road's ours." The wind picked up, lifting strands of my hair into my eyes. My stomach clenched. My fingers gripped the edge of the seat. Grant leaned forward. "Maybe ease up a little, man." Elijah grinned into the rearview mirror. "You nervous too?" "I just don't feel like peeling Rachel off the windshield tonight." I appreciated the attempt, but Elijah just waved it off. "This car handles like a dream. I could drive her with my eyes closed." The engine purred louder as he pressed the gas. The speedometer ticked past 70, then 80, then higher. The trees became a blur of black and green. I turned to look at Cassidy. She had her head resting against the window, eyes closed, smiling like it was all some romantic joyride. I opened my mouth again to speak, and that's when I saw the turn, a sharp bend in the road, a reflective post flickering like a warning. Elijah tapped the brakes, but too late. The tires shrieked as they met the curve. The world tilted. The car jolted hard to the left. The wheels lost grip. I heard Grant shout, heard Cassidy scream. Elijah cursed, trying to correct the wheel, but the road was slick with dew and fallen pine needles. And then the headlights caught a flash of metal. A truck, big, fast, coming right at us. I saw the driver's eyes, wide, panicked, just before the truck swerved, missing us by inches. The impact never came, but the momentum did. The BMW spun, rubber burned. Then the world went weightless. We were off the road, skimming air. Time stretched like molasses. I saw Cassidy's hand reaching out, fingers slow as smoke. Grant's body lunging forward, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. Elijah yanking at the wheel like it could change anything. And then I was flying. The windshield shattered like ice. Glass sprayed across my skin. I was weightless, boneless, air and blood and fear. The last thing I saw was the glow of taillights as the crimson car twisted in the dark, spinning, flipping, gone. Silence is different after a crash. It's not still. It's full of echoes, groans from bending metal, the ticking of something hot cooling off, the sound of blood moving through your ears, even when the rest of you can't. Then came the pain, all at once, bright, biting, unbearable. I tried to move. My arms screamed. My back was on fire. I opened my mouth, and no sound came out. There were voices, far away, Cassidy calling my name, Elijah swearing, Grant trying to keep someone calm. Then everything disappeared. Light returned in pieces. First was the ceiling, pale, cracked, unfamiliar. Then the beeping, soft and rhythmic, somewhere near my head. A curtain rustled. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled my lungs. I blinked, tried to sit up and couldn't. "Rachel," someone whispered. "Mama." Her hand touched my cheek, soft and trembling. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight, eyes swollen with sleepless nights. "You're okay," she murmured. "You're safe now, baby. You're here." A doctor appeared beside her, middle-aged, clean-shaven, kind eyes behind rectangular glasses. "Miss Morgan," he said gently, "I'm Dr. Malcolm Hayes. You've been through quite a lot." My mouth was dry as chalk. "What happened?" I managed to rasp. "You were in a car accident," he said. "Severe trauma. You've been unconscious for nearly 2 days. We stabilized you, performed surgery on your spine and clavicle. The good news is you're alive, and your brain function is intact." I stared at him. "And the bad?" He hesitated, then stepped closer. "There's been damage to your spinal cord. You're experiencing paralysis from the waist down. We'll need time to assess the long-term prognosis. But for now, you won't be able to feel or move your legs." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words dropped into my chest like stones into deep water. I waited for the splash, the ripple, but all I felt was stillness. No legs, no movement, no way back. I closed my eyes and saw her. "Miss Moira Lou, if you do, it'll be a long way back." She had been right, and I hadn't listened. The first time I tried to move, it felt like my body wasn't mine. My fingers twitched. My arms obeyed. Stiff and sore but present. But from the waist down, nothing. Just a heavy silence, like the lower half of me had been erased. Dr. Hayes came in every morning. He adjusted machines, checked vitals, asked how I was sleeping. He never once used the word never. He said things like recovery takes time, and we won't know the full picture for a while. But I saw it in his eyes. That quiet pause before he answered. That soft look when he thought I wasn't watching. Mama didn't leave my side. She read to me when I couldn't sleep, brushed my hair when I was too weak to lift a comb. Daddy sat in the corner, silent, hands folded, eyes burning behind old military calm. I hated that room, hated the beeping, hated the way nurses spoke to me like I might break. But most of all, I hated the moment every morning when I opened my eyes, hoped it had all been a dream, and realized it hadn't. On day 4, Cassidy showed up. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a bouquet of sunflowers in a paper-wrapped cone. Her face was puffy, makeup faded. "Hey," she said. I didn't answer. She stepped inside slowly. I wanted to come earlier, but I didn't know what to say. "You could have said you were sorry," I whispered. "I am," she said quickly, eyes welling up. "God, Rachel, I am so sorry. If I hadn't pushed me, talked me into going, ignored the fact that he was drunk?" "Yeah." She flinched. I didn't know he was going to drive like that. I looked away. Outside the window, a storm was rolling in, gray clouds stacking high like bruises. "He almost died too," she added. "He has a concussion. Broken ribs. Grant's arm is in a cast. Wesley got off with bruises, but we were lucky. So lucky." I let the silence speak for me. Cassidy stepped closer. "I brought your journal." She held out the little leather-bound notebook I kept on my nightstand. "You always said writing helps when everything feels too much." I took it, not because I wanted to, but because it felt like the only part of my old life that wasn't soaked in guilt. "I'll go," she said. "I just wanted to see you. And say I love you." She turned toward the door. "Cass," I called, voice dry and cracking. "You didn't make him drink, but you laughed when he said he'd drive. You didn't stop him." "I didn't stop him. None of us did." She nodded. "I know." Then she left. The next few weeks passed in fragments. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, questions I didn't want to answer, exercises I didn't want to try. Sometimes I made progress. Sometimes I cried just from sitting upright for 10 minutes. One day, Dr. Hayes wheeled in a new machine, a lift system to help me transfer to a chair. "This next phase will be hard," he said, "but I think you're ready." "Ready to what?" I snapped. "Be a burden? Learn how to exist in half a body." He didn't flinch. "Ready to live. You're allowed to grieve what you lost. But don't forget you're still here." I stared at him. "I don't know how to be this version of me." You'll learn, he said. The world doesn't get to decide your value. You do. That night, I opened my journal. I didn't write about the pain or the silence or the pity in people's eyes. I wrote about the color of the sky outside my window, the way my mother's voice trembled when she read poetry aloud, the scent of hand lotion and lemon soap. Small things, but they were mine. A week later, I moved back home, but not to our old apartment. Daddy had made a decision while I was in the hospital. He sold our condo and used the money to renovate Grandma's old house on Magnolia Street. No stairs, he said. We widened the doors, built a ramp. The garden's still a mess, but we'll fix it. I cried when I saw it, not out of sadness, but something deeper. A grief tangled with gratitude. They were giving me a new life. Not perfect, not what I'd imagined, but real, tangible. And I was beginning to believe maybe that was enough. It rained the day we moved in. Not a thunderstorm, just a slow, southern rain, the kind that made everything smell like wet pine and iron. The movers were soaked by the time they rolled my chair up the new ramp, but Mama insisted on offering them sweet tea anyway. No one works this hard in Savannah without something cold, she said, shooing Daddy toward the fridge. I hadn't seen the house in years. Grandma's old place had always felt too still, too creaky. But now, with its fresh white trim and jasmine vines curling up the porch railings, it looked like something out of a storybook. The windows had been lowered. The doors widened. A ramp curved around the front steps like it had always belonged. And inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and new beginnings. My room was at the back, where the sun touched the walls just right in the morning. Mama had brought in soft blankets, pale yellow curtains, and a new desk by the window for journaling. I figured you'd need a little quiet space to write, she said softly, brushing invisible dust from the bookshelf. And a view. Outside that window stood the same magnolia tree I used to climb as a girl. It was taller now, thicker around the base, leaves dark and glossy with raindrops. But it was still there, like me scarred but standing. The hardest part wasn't the pain. It wasn't the chair or the stairs at the grocery store or the way people talked slower to me, like I couldn't keep up. The hardest part was forgiving myself. I replayed that night more times than I could count. The laughter in the car, the hum of the radio, the moment I didn't speak up, or maybe the moment I did, and it wasn't enough. I wanted someone to blame, and for a while that someone was me. But healing is strange. It sneaks up on you, not in grand gestures, but in the way you start noticing the sound of wind through the porch screens, or the way sunflowers tilt their heads toward light no matter how many storms pass through. I started physical therapy again, this time at St. Juniper's Spine and Recovery Clinic, a 30-minute drive into town. The first time I wheeled through the automatic doors, I saw a man with no arms painting with his teeth. I saw a girl with a spinal brace teaching herself how to dance with one leg. I saw life, messy and miraculous and raw. And for the first time since the accident, I felt less alone. Weeks later, Cassidy visited. She parked beneath the magnolia tree, stepping out with a box in her arms. Her face was thinner, her eyes ringed with guilt. "Still can't believe your daddy fixed up this whole place," she said, settling the box on my lap. "It looks like a bed and breakfast from a Hallmark movie." I smiled faintly, just missing the handsome stranger who owns a bakery next door. She chuckled, then bit her lip. I brought pictures, from before and from that night. I thought, maybe if you wanted to talk. I looked at her, really looked at her. The girl who had been with me through first kisses, homecoming heartbreaks, failed math tests, midnight swims, and one terrible, irreversible night. "I don't want to talk about the accident," I said quietly. "Not yet." She nodded. "Okay. But I do forgive you." Her breath caught. "Even if I don't forgive myself. Especially then." She cried right there on the porch. And this time, I held her. Every night before bed, I rolled myself to the window. I watched the magnolia leaves flutter, felt the wind through the open glass. I thought of all the versions of me that had stood under that tree. Child, teenager, reckless girl in love, broken woman in a hospital bed. And I whispered to the night, I'm still here. That was enough. For now. It started with the knock. Not the soft kind from neighbors bringing banana bread or church ladies dropping off casseroles. This one was firm, deliberate. I was in the kitchen, rolling backward from the fridge with a pitcher of water balanced on my lap when I heard it. Mama peeked out the window. It's a young man, about your age, holding a camera. She opened the door. Hi, ma'am. I'm Grant Holloway. I was a passenger in the car that night. My throat closed. I hadn't seen him since the crash. Last I remembered, he was sitting behind me, arguing with Wesley over a playlist. Now, he looked different, older, not in years, but in weight. Like guilt had aged him faster than time. Can I come in for a moment? He asked gently. Mama looked at me. I nodded once. He sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, camera case still slung across his shoulder. I've been filming a documentary, he said, voice low, about spinal injury survivors. What they go through, the silent part of it. I wanted to ask if you'd consider being part of it. I raised an eyebrow. You're kidding. No, I know how it sounds. But after what happened, I couldn't just go back to normal. I needed to face it. So I started telling people stories. Real people. Not actors. Not pity. Just truth. I didn't say anything. He reached into his bag and pulled out a letter. The envelope was creased, worn like it had been carried around too long. This was meant for you. I wrote it 2 weeks after the accident, but I couldn't send it. I hesitated, then took it. He stood up. I'll leave you with it. No pressure about the documentary. Just thank you for listening. I waited until the house was quiet. Then I opened the letter. Rachel, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe I'll have the courage to send it. Maybe not. But I need to try. That night changed all of us. I remember everything. The music, the way you laughed when Cassidy sang off-key, the moment Wesley grabbed the wheel. I remember yelling at him to stop. I remember the silence before the crash. And I remember crawling out and not seeing you move. I was the only one who didn't black out. I saw you. I saw the way your legs didn't move. I wanted to help, but I froze. I hate myself for that. I've watched the footage 1,000 times. From my camera. From the dash. I've analyzed every second, trying to figure out if I could have done more. The truth is, I could have. I've decided to tell stories now. Not for forgiveness. Just for understanding. If you ever want to talk or yell or cry, I'm here. Grant. The next morning, I called him. You can interview me, I said. His breath caught. Are you sure? No, but let's do it anyway. He arrived 2 hours later. No big crew. Just him, a tripod, and a microphone. We filmed on the porch. I told him about the hospital, about the silence in my legs, about the days when getting dressed felt like climbing a mountain. I told him about the anger, the shame, the slow stitching together of something that resembled hope. But I also told him about the tree outside my window, about the way Cassidy cried in my arms, about how Mama still made sweet tea like it was a religion. He didn't interrupt once. When we were done, he said, You're not just a survivor. You're a storyteller. I smiled. No, I'm just finally learning how to tell the truth. That night, I left the letter on my nightstand, not because I needed to reread it, but because for the first time, I didn't feel alone in the memory. The wedding was small. Nothing like the grand riverfront affairs you'd see in Savannah society columns. Just 20 guests, a few rows of folding chairs under the magnolia tree in our front yard, and a violinist from the local college who played with more heart than precision. I wore a pale blue dress Mama helped tailor to fit my chair, and in place of a veil, I wore the silver comb Grandma left me, the one with the mother-of-pearl lilies carved along its edge. The groom stood barefoot in the grass. Yes, barefoot. Grant Holloway had shown up in my life like a ghost, unresolved, guilt-ridden, carrying a camera and an apology. I didn't expect to let him in. I didn't expect his presence to feel like breath after drowning. But somehow, through all the late-night editing sessions, the quiet porch conversations, and the hours we spent turning pain into testimony, something shifted. Not suddenly, not romantically, just honestly. The first time he kissed me, it wasn't fireworks. It was a whisper, like the universe saying, "You can start again." Cassidy was my maid of honor. She cried more than I did, which was saying something. Mama baked the cake herself, a lemon almond layer with white frosting and flowers she picked from the yard. Daddy built a little arch from cedar branches and draped it in gauze and twinkle lights. I remember wheeling myself down the makeshift aisle and seeing every face I loved smiling back at me. Not with pity, not with sadness, with joy, pure, radiant joy. After the vows, after the kiss, after the laughter and dancing and barefoot, slow steps in the moonlight, I found a moment alone by the porch swing. The air was thick with jasmine. The moonlight caught on the old wind chimes, making them shimmer like they'd been waiting for this moment too. I thought of all the versions of myself I had been. The girl who thought love meant losing yourself. The woman who believed broken meant unlovable. The survivor who mistook silence for strength. And now this, a wife, a storyteller, a woman not defined by what she'd lost, but by what she had dared to rebuild. A week later, Grant and I aired the documentary. It wasn't flashy, just raw footage and soft narration. But it spread faster than we imagined. Shared by nurses, trauma survivors, teachers, mothers, people in wheelchairs who finally saw their truth reflected somewhere besides hospital brochures. We called it Still Here, because that's what we were. Still here, still loving, still healing, still choosing joy even when grief whispered its old songs. One night, months later, I sat by my window while Grant slept, our cat curled up between my feet. A breeze rustled through the magnolia leaves. Somewhere far off, a train passed, low and steady. I reached for the journal on my windowsill and wrote. Today, I laughed without wincing. Today, I stood in my kitchen, hands on the counter, legs braced in my new therapy frame, and made biscuits from scratch. Today, I remembered the crash, and it didn't steal my breath. Today, I let myself be loved. Fully, without fear, without apology. I closed the journal and smiled. The past hadn't vanished. It never would, but it didn't own me anymore. People ask me if I believe in miracles. I don't know how to answer that, but I believe in stubborn grace. I believe in second chances that don't announce themselves. Only knock softly when you're finally ready. I believe in quiet forgiveness, porch swings, camera lenses that capture truth instead of perfection. And I believe in the girl I used to be, the one who lay in a hospital bed, thinking her life was over. She was wrong. It was just beginning.